Case 3 of the Heikigan Roku, or the Blue Cliff Record. Master Ma is unwell. First, I'll read the introduction, or the pointer to the case by Master Yuanwu. One device, one object, one word, one phrase. The intent is that you have a place to enter. Still, this is gouging a wound in healthy flesh. It can become a nest or a den. The great function appears without abiding by fixed principles. The intent is that you'll realize there is something transcendental. It covers the sky and covers the earth, yet it cannot be grasped. This way will do, and not this way will do too. But this is too diffuse. This way won't do, and not this way won't do either. This is too cut off. Without treading either of these two paths, what would be right? Please test yourself. I cite this for you to see. And then the main case. Great Master Ma was unwell. The temple superintendent asked him, "Teacher, how has your venerable health been in recent days?" The great master said, "Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha." And finally, the verse on the case by Master Suedo, or Secho. Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha, what kind of people were the ancient emperors in comparison to them? For 20 years I have suffered bitterly. How many times have I gone down into the blue dragon's cave for you? This distress is worth recounting. Clear-eyed, patch-robed monks should not take it lightly. So this case features one of the greatest Zen masters of all time, Mazu Daoyi, or Ancestor Ma, sometimes referred to as Great Master Ma, or Baso in Japanese. He lived during the Tang Dynasty in the 8th century, sometimes referred to as the Golden Age of Zen. He was the Dharma heir of Huaizhang, who himself was an exceptionally gifted master and a disciple of the 6th Zen patriarch Huineng. Ma's first encounter with Huaizhang brought about an awakening experience, which Yuanwu explains as follows. Mazu was dwelling in Chuanfa Temple. All day he sat meditating. Master Huaizhang knew that this man Ma was a vessel of Dharma and went to question him. "Great worthy," he said, "what are you aiming at by sitting meditation?" Ma replied, "I aim to become a Buddha." Huaizhang then picked up a tile and began to rub it on a rock in front of the hermitage. Ma asked him what he was doing rubbing the tile, and Huaizhang replied, "I am polishing it to make a mirror." Ma said, "How can you make a mirror by polishing a tile?" Huaizhang said, "Granted, rubbing a tile will not make a mirror, but how can sitting meditation make a Buddha?" At this, Ma was greatly awakened and decided to stay at Huaizhang's temple. He stayed and served Huaizhang every day for the next 10 years. Later, as a teacher, Ma was famous for using slaps and shouts and blows of the stick to teach his students. By our standards today, that might be deemed abusive, but sometimes a well-intentioned, well-timed blow can bring someone right through the door into enlightenment. I've seen it happen. In Matsu's case, his teaching produced 139 enlightened Dharma successors, so we may not want to judge his methods too harshly or prematurely. Matsu is also credited with developing what was in his time considered a radical view of original enlightenment, asserting that everyday mind is the way, and mind itself is Buddha. Well, these are phrases that have been repeated and repeated and repeated for 13 centuries. And I think they have some bearing on this case before us today. It's truly amazing that this individual who lived so long ago has had such an enduring impact on our practice. And I would suggest that we owe him an equally enduring debt of gratitude. So now, in the present case, Master Ma is unwell. Another translation of the koan says he was seriously ill. Now, if you think about it, being seriously ill in the year, let's say, 780 CE, so long before contemporary germ theory or antibiotics or anything like that. And so being seriously ill meant there was a very serious risk of death. Consequently, there arose what is by now a very long-standing tradition of monks inquiring about their master's health and being very solicitous when their teachers were sick. After all, a temple or a monastery without a teacher is missing one of the three treasures that make our practice effective and harmonious. So, this is why the head monk asks Mazu, how has your venerable health been in recent days? I'm looking forward to the day when my students ask me about my venerable health. And Master Yuanwu, commenting on this question of the temple superintendent, the head monk, he writes, 404 diseases break out all at once. All these diseases break out just as a matter of course because you asked this question. What he's really saying here is something like, uh-oh, now you've gone and done it, you've asked a question, and now you're going to get something back that's going to knock you off your center. Yuanwu also remarks that this question from the temple superintendent means, quote, they may be seeing a dead monk in a few days, unquote. Who do you suppose he's referring to? Great Master Ma? He is seriously ill, but I would think probably not. You see, sometimes in Zen, when we talk about dying, we really mean it metaphorically. And when used metaphorically, death refers to the dropping off of mind and body. In fact, you'll sometimes hear the phrase or read the phrase, the great death, which is a trope for a daikensho experience or a very deep, clear enlightenment experience. So Mazu is asked how he's feeling, and he replies,
Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha.
Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. That little phrase is what we have to penetrate in this koan. That's really our only doorway in to the center. So who are these two Buddhas, sun-faced Buddha and moon-faced Buddha? Well, they are two Buddhas listed in the Buddha names scripture, which is a compilation of the names of over 1,000 Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And I guess in centuries past, it was very often used as the basis for a ceremony of veneration. And according to Sekida Roshi, sun-faced Buddha is said to live 1,800 years. He writes, imagine you are watching the glorious setting sun at the far end of the ocean. Moment by moment, the golden-faced Buddha sinks below the horizon. No words can describe the glory and radiance of his face. Everything is condensed into this present moment. It is eternal. Sekida Roshi then explains that moon-faced Buddha is said to live only for a day and a night. He says you can imagine that at midnight you are watching the moon's mirror-like face, inclined a little in her musing, poised over the mountains. Everything is silent. Her life may be only one day and one night, but this moment after moment's being truly represents real existence. So, sun-faced Buddha lives 1800 years, and moon-faced Buddha for a day and a night. You have to wonder why one Buddha is inexpressibly radiant and glorious, and the other, despite its natural beauty, is relatively small and pale and very short-lived. Something about this doesn't seem quite balanced or quite equal. And it is, I would say, that very inequality that draws us into the koan. It may cause us to think that sun-faced Buddha represents health and moon-faced Buddha illness. And I don't think we would be wrong about that. On the other hand, sun-faced Buddha and moon-faced Buddha are in fact both Buddhas. And as Buddhas, their spiritual power and capacity are identical by definition. This is why it is said that only Buddha can see a Buddha. Only a supremely awakened being is able to see whether another being is also supremely awakened. So, which viewpoint is the more important one in this case? If we say it's the unique nature of each of these two Buddhas that deserves emphasis or attention, then we're looking at the koan, or we're looking at reality from the perspective of the relative truth. It's the world of up and down, right and wrong, you and I, sun and moon, health and illness, and so on. So from this perspective, one Buddha is not like the other Buddha. This sort of reminds me of the old Sesame Street song, one of these things is not like the others. And kids would be shown, for example, a hamburger, an ice cream cone, and an apple, and then something like a mitten. Well, that's what we have here when looking at things from the relative perspective. One Buddha is not like the other. But on the other hand, if we focus on the identical Buddha nature of these two Buddhas, then we're looking at reality from, let's say, the absolute perspective, the perspective of emptiness. It's what we would more typically say in the Zen tradition. This is the world of the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra, which says there is no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no old age, no sickness, and no death. So should we be looking at this case from the perspective of form, the relative, or the absolute, emptiness? In his introduction to this case, you'll remember Master Yuan Wu speculates that you might think this case comes down to looking at reality in some really open, accepting way, taking things as they come, whatever the form may be. It's like saying this way will do and not this way will do. Or to put it another way, sometimes I feel great and sometimes I feel terrible. But Yuan Wu says this approach to reality is too diffuse. There is something wishy-washy about it. You could also take the approach of rejecting the whole paradoxical mess of form and emptiness, which Yuan Wu might describe as this way won't do, and not this way won't do either. That's like saying no old age, no sickness, no death. Well, at some level, it's true there is no old age, sickness, or death. It's the absolute perspective, like I said. But I gotta tell you, when I'm sick, I'm really uncomfortable. I don't want to hear that I'm not sick when I'm hunkered down in my blankets, shivering with a fever, or leaning over the toilet because I have to throw up. So while the absolute perspective may be valid, Yuan Wu says that trying to solve the present case with that point of view is too cut off. Another translation says this approach leads to being obstructed by an unapproachable cliff face. So either way, you're left with nothing. You have to enter it, as Yuan Wu says, without treading either of these two paths. Really? How do you get around form and emptiness? Isn't that all there is? You have to enter the koan some other way. And that way, he says, is like gouging a wound in healthy flesh. Doesn't sound pleasant, does it? But we really have no choice. Getting beyond the duality of the relative and the absolute, or form and emptiness, is really hard. He says it's extremely difficult to see the true faces of the sun-faced Buddha and moon-faced Buddha. This is why we sometimes say Buddhist practice can lead to more, not less, suffering in the beginning. I can attest to it personally. I still remember trying to get out of a stone grave. I'm referring here to one of the koans from the collection of 200 miscellaneous koans that we start with in our koan curriculum in the White Plum Asanga. The whole koan is, how do you get out of a stone grave that is locked from the outside? Well, I was really blocked for some reason with this particular koan, and it took me a while to get through it, or get out of the grave. And when I did, it honestly felt like my whole body and mind were being ripped apart. I mean, I cried. But immediately after that, I had this tremendous sense of relief and a kind of empowerment, I guess I would say. I didn't have to be, worried about that anymore. So sometimes these koans, they get so sticky, so difficult, that they can really make you sick just thinking about them. I mean, just thinking about what I had to get through, what I had to do to get through this current case. Master Ma is unwell. To get through sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha, sort of makes me sick to my stomach. Now, I don't know about you, but I just hate being sick. I don't enjoy lying in bed for hours. Fever and body aches are the worst. Add in a sick stomach and you have all the ingredients for real misery. Of course, there are other diseases that we would probably say are worse than, let's say, stomach flu, Ebola, river blindness, cancer, 100 others. But here it is. We all get sick. Every one of us. And if you know the story of the Buddha's life, this is one of the first things that young Siddhartha learned when he first left his father's palace, right? He learned that everyone gets old. And as my mother always says, getting old is not for sissies. Because, it hurts. And he also became intimately acquainted with death when he saw a corpse for the first time. Death comes to us all. We do everything in our power to avoid it, including going into denial about it, but eventually we have to throw in the towel. And of course, he saw a sick person, maybe, someone lying in bed. Maybe they were moaning with a fever, chills, body aches, what have you, throwing up in a bucket. We all get sick. No one who was ever born, including great Master Ma, can avoid it. Even the Buddha could not avoid it. So when he saw these things, Siddhartha set out on a religious life. He wanted to bring an end to old age, sickness, and death, or the suffering that results from those things. His initial efforts as a monk were pretty torturous too, because in those days the idea was that you needed to weaken the body. And you would do that through various forms of self-mortification. You would weaken the body in order to release the soul. But after a time, that didn't work. And Siddhartha took another path, what he called the middle way. He broke his fast, a fast that had almost killed him, and he began to eat every day. He took shelter when he could. He meditated while sitting on a pillow of grass instead of a bare rock. We sometimes call that first zafu, the diamond throne. But despite these somewhat more comfortable accoutrements, the life of a wandering monk was still pretty darn austere. You had to really go all the way, or you just had to go home. There's a story about Siddhartha returning from his begging alms with a bowl of really terrible food. Maybe it was spoiled or what, I don't know. I mean, it was just disgusting, and he didn't want to eat it. But he sat down and had a little talk with himself. He reminded himself that he had chosen this life, and he had chosen it for a reason. And being a person of integrity, he renewed his commitment to finding a solution to the causes of human suffering. And when he really considered the reality, the universal reality of suffering, he was able to sit down and eat that food. The point is, that's the nature of genuinely transformative practice. If you want to have a genuine breakthrough, you really have to be very thoroughgoing. That's what Yuan Wu says multiple times in his commentary on this koan. To be honest, we really have to give 100% effort. I mean, I appreciate it when people give 99% effort, I really do. But you're not going to get there with 99% effort. Even 99.9999% effort is not going to do it. It has to be 100%. And that's why in the verse to this case by Master Suedo, he writes, "For 20 years I have suffered bitterly. How many times have I gone down into the blue dragon's cave for you?" What he's referring to here is a cave that is said to be at the bottom of the sea. And in this cave there is a ferocious dragon guarding a treasure. Now, if you want the treasure, you have to dive very deep. And then you have to wrest it away from that terrible, terrible dragon. Only someone who is very brave, very determined, and very resolved can do it. So Suedo is saying he's put himself through the ringer again and again for 20 years. Not just for his own personal transformation, but for everyone's. And what's implied by that is that when you save yourself, when you give 100%, when you seize upon the Dharma treasure that lies at the bottom of your personal ocean of suffering, you save everyone else at the same time. I mean, this is reflected in our 4 Bodhisattva vows. We chant, "Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them." It sounds paradoxical. How can one single person save an infinite number of sentient beings? I'll just tell you, it's precisely because they are numberless that it is possible to do it. It's also possible to put an end to our desires, even though we say they are inexhaustible. It's possible to master all dharmas, even though they are boundless. It's possible to attain the Buddha way, even though it is unsurpassable. The point is that you can do anything if you're willing to expose yourself completely, utterly, to your own suffering. Really, I could just say to your own life. And when you expose yourself to your life as it is, then you expose yourself to everyone and everything and the suffering that all beings experience. This is not about, to be clear, it's not about being a masochist. I mean that you just have to be honest with yourself about who you are, what you are, about the nature of your life. Stop trying to keep yourself set apart from everything and everyone else. What are you protecting? Is it real? If you're really open, really honest, yes, you may indeed experience some distress. But as Shui-do says in his poem, this distress is worth recounting. Don't make light of it. No, don't make light of it. Consider what you're doing, consider what you're willing to do to realize your own Dharma treasure. It's like you can spend your life feeling frustrated and confused about why you're even on this planet. Or you can spend your life digging in, diving down, returning ultimately to the light. So where does that take us with this case? We know we can't wallow around in the duality of form and emptiness, or of the relative and absolute truths. And we can't simplify things by dismissing out of hand one of those truths in favor of the other. You can decide that, as it says in the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Okay, fine. You can agree with that. But then that's just intellectual. You're not responding out of your own personal experience. You're just renting someone else's truth. It's good guidance, but you have to make it your own. You have to see it yourself. So to see through this koan, you're going to have to do something, and do it on your own. We all do. It may not be very pleasant, but the reward is there. The treasure is there, I promise. You can pass through this in the same way that like one passes through a long dark tunnel and comes out the other end into the light. Many years ago, my wife and I took a train trip. We went from Denver Union Station to California, and one of the first things that you experience on that particular route is the Moffat Tunnel. So you cross the Continental Divide under the mountains, like underground. You go through the Moffat Tunnel. It's a very interesting experience because you spend about 10 or 11 minutes in complete darkness, total darkness. And then finally you emerge at the other end, the other side of the Rocky Mountains, come back out into the light. This works well as a metaphor for what we have to do to resolve this case. We can also talk about it in terms of how we mature in our practice. Now, this could get into maybe a little more detail than is necessary, but we could talk about 5 stages of awakened experience, enlightened experience. Starting with the first one, which is when we have an insight into emptiness, the emptiness of all phenomenal reality. Because we practice a lot, we look and we look and we look, trying to figure out what we truly are, what things really are in their essence. And what happens is we come up again and again empty-handed, completely empty-handed, until finally we exhaust our capacity to come up with new fantasies about all that, and we realize at last things don't have an enduring self-nature. They are lacking that. And later, as this understanding ripens, there is a clear sense that it's by virtue of this emptiness that we no longer see ourselves as distinct or separate from everything else. We become unified with or fused with everything in our lives. And still later, we arrive in a place where we begin to let go of our own awakening. Because if you cling to your insight, if you cling to your understanding of emptiness, form and emptiness, all you're going to do is create suffering for yourself and others. People get stuck here all the time. But if we manage to begin to let go of even profound awakening, what happens is we become alive with the Four Noble Truths. We become acutely aware of the suffering of other beings, and compassion radiates out of us. Not because we choose to have it come out of us, but because we can't help it. And as we continue to pursue our practice, we come back to our ordinary daily life, fully integrated with the world. Sort of reminds me of the lines by Walt Whitman when he says, "I am vast, I contain multitudes." We become completely fused with reality, indistinguishable from the world of people and cars, animals and buildings, stars and flowers, birds and rocks. Such a person is so fully integrated into the world that they almost seem not to even exist. Almost every trace of enlightenment is gone. And finally, at the very pinnacle of enlightened existence, which almost no one reaches, you just become an ordinary person again. All traces of enlightenment completely gone. Someone who attains this level of awakening is very profoundly enlightened. They don't even recognize that they are enlightened. Now, going through all of that, I don't mean to imply that we can kind of map moon-faced Buddha, sun-faced Buddha, sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha onto one of these stages of awakening, but I think if you think about what we would say would be the middle or third stage, which is sometimes referred to as coming from within the absolute, that you might have your way in to this koan. If you are coming from within the absolute, deeply awakened, deeply enlightened, and yet understanding that your realization of reality, your insight, no matter how deep and clear it may be, has to be let go of. You're at a place where you're about to emerge back into the ordinary world. Again, it's like coming out of a long dark tunnel back into the light, or coming back to health and well-being after having been ill. And it all happens because you did what you had to do. You did the one and only thing that makes it all possible. You went into that dark place. You agreed. You allowed yourself your own life, your own suffering. You went down, as Secho says, into this underwater cave, the Blue Dragon's cave. The brilliant, beautiful thing about this is that anyone can do it. You, watching this video right now, you can do it. You don't have to be special. You don't have to be a monk. You don't have to wear robes. You can do it. Thank you for listening. If you have questions or comments about today's talk, please leave comments on this video. I've heard YouTubers say it so often, I'm reluctant to say it myself, but you can subscribe and like and do all that stuff. But you don't have to. Thank you.